So let's continue. Although we know that synthetic toxicants are very new because we make them man-made, but organisms, they have been exposed to these natural toxicants for millions of years. Things like mercury ions, cadmiums, arsenic, and other harmful substances are actually found naturally in the environment. So some of these organisms produce biological toxins to avoid predators or to capture their prey. For instance, we have the venom in the poisonous snakes, the toxins in the sea urchins. They're very tasty. So naturally, organisms, we have a barrier such as the skin, scales, and feathers and fur. These are the first line of defense against the toxic substances because they help the body to resist uptake from the surrounding environment. But the thing is, the toxicants can circumvent these barriers, the skin, right, and enter the body from other places. When we eat, when we drink, and we breathe. So, once these toxics are inhaled or ingested by the organisms, they are distributed widely by the circulatory and the lymph system in the animals, and of course by the vascular system in the plants. Organisms possess biochemical pathways that use the enzyme to detoxify harmful chemicals. That's why we say detox, right? So some of these pathways break down or metabolize these toxic substances or render them very inert. So maybe the enzyme will form a cage around it, right, and give off some molecule to make them inert. So there are other pathways that make toxic substances more water soluble, more hydrophilic, so that they're easier to be passed through to the urinary system. And for the humans, many of these pathways are actually found in the liver. So that's why the liver is a very important organ in the body. And this organ, the liver, is disproportionately affected by the intake of harmful substances, like drinking too much alcohol, beer, wine. So some toxic substances cannot be effectively detoxified or made water soluble by detoxification enzymes. Now these chemicals, right, they'll be sequestered, combined together, stored in the fatty tissues and the cell membrane to keep them away from vital organs. So these kind of toxicants could include like heavy metals and dioxins, and some of the insecticides, famous one like DDT, they are stored in the body tissue in this manner. So that's why scientists, many of my friends who say that you should not eat fatty food based on this reason because those fats trap a lot of toxins. But I still like them. Tasty. Now, individuals could vary in their responses to the hazard due to a few reasons. And some of these defenses, right, described just now actually have genetic basis. So, individuals may respond differently to identical exposures to hazard because they have different combination of genes. And you know what? Poorer health also make an individual more sensitive to biological and chemical hazards. That's why I go to gym every other day to run and keep myself a bit fitter. You should do that too. And this kind of sensitivity to the toxin can also vary with sex, the gender, age, and the weight. And because of the smaller size and the rapid development in the organ system, the younger organisms, the babies, fetuses, infants or young children, they tend to be more sensitive to the toxicants than adults. Think about it, they have a smaller body system, smaller amount of water, fats, so the proportion, the percentage of these toxicants in the body, right, seems to be larger. Now, in the US, right, the regulatory agencies in the EPA, they typically set the human chemical exposure standards for adults and then extrapolate downwards to the infants and the children. So they can use either the bone masses or the weight of the children or the height, different measures to see what are the limit to set for the amount of toxins. We also know that the type of exposure can affect the response. So the risk posed by a hazard often comes across according to whether a person experienced high exposure for a short period of time, and we call it the acute exposure. Alright, not very acute, just acute. Or when we talk about the low exposure over a long period of time, we call that chronic exposure. So in the history, the incidences of acute exposure is actually easier to recognize. Why? Because they often stem from the discrete events, like, suddenly we ingested a lot of chemical, right? We know because you see the bottle, oh my goodness, these toxins. Oil spill, disasters, chemical spill, or nuclear accidents. So these are like events that are very loud, very alarming, one time, high risk, acute exposure. And the toxicity test in the lab, right, generally reflects this acute toxicity effect because it's one time very strong. But the thing is, chronic exposure is more common because how many times you see a huge accident exploding, right? And when chronic exposure is more common, it is actually more difficult to detect and diagnose because it's actually a small kind of accumulation over a period of time, right? So it's like creeping up, and then we never know how much we have accumulated so much of these toxins. So the chronic exposure often affects the organs gradually, like smoking causes lung cancer, or when you have alcohol abuse, too addicted to alcohol, beer, that leads to a liver or kidney damage. But these are the results that we only see after many, many years, not after one day or a week. The pesticide residues in the food, right, or arsenic in drinking water also pose chronic risk. That's why we have a saying that do not buy from the same store in the canteen all the time, because you never know what are the sources of the veggies or the meat. And because of the long time periods involved, the relationship between the cause and effect might not be very apparent. So I mentioned just now that we are never sure whether it's cause and effect or just a correlation, right? Now, when the toxicants concentrate in the environment, right, and harm the health of many individuals, the population are affected. So they become smaller. So the decline in this species population can then affect other species because we have a prey and predator. Now, we know that if the species, right, they are the prey of the organisms that are affected by toxicants, then what happens? The predation level are lower. So imagine, right, you have a prey and predator. Then the predator is harmed by a certain kind of toxicants, so their population goes down. What happens to the prey? Because now we have lower amount of predators, the prey will increase in population. That causes a shift in equilibrium. Now, but the predators of the poison species would have their population decline, right? Because their food source becomes less abundant. So although we have predator 1, but the predator's predator will also decrease because they got nothing to eat, because they have a fewer option for the choice of the meal. So this kind of cascading impacts can cause changes in the composition of the biological community and to threaten the ecosystem functioning. Now, airborne substances can travel very widely. We know that toxic substances, right, they are released from around the world from agriculture, industrial, domestic activities, and they are sometimes redistributed by the air currents, and they exert impacts on the ecosystem far greater than the emission site. Now, because there's so many substances that are carried by wind, right, these synthetic chemicals that we make are mostly good, but some of them are harmful. They are ubiquitous worldwide, found everywhere. Now, even if you have a site where that seems very pristine, you go to a foreign country, say, oh, they're so clean, but you never know, there are toxic chemicals there. So scientists to travel to the most remote alpine lakes, where? British Columbia, with a low population. They even find them, contaminating the industrial toxicants, right? The PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls. And these are the byproducts of chemicals that are used in transformers, right? Transformers are found in sockets, your chargers, right? Not the movie, yeah? And other electrical equipments. So the Earth's polar regions, right? They are extremely polluted, contaminated, because the natural patterns, right, of the global atmospheric circulations you have seen in the previous slide, they tend to move these airborne chemicals towards the poles due to their attractions. And so although we manufacture and apply synthetic substances mainly in the temperate or the tropical regions, like near the equator, near the countries where people stay in big cities, the contaminants are very, very concentrated in the tissues in Arctic polar bears. Surprising? Antarctic penguins and the people living in Greenland, they are actually very exposed to the contaminants. You might be very surprised.